Hi, Miguel.
Hey Alma, hey everyone. Hey Patrick.
Hey, Mix.
How are you guys?
Good, you?
Alive. Can't complain.
How's the event going so far?
Say that again, Patrick.
Oh, Alma, I was just wondering how the event is going.
Hello?
Oh. Actually, I think Nadia is here to determine all of these technical issues, so she's an expert.
I was having a bite of sandwich. I might change. There's a lot of echo.
Yeah, I hear it.
You turn your
Hello? Yeah.
Oh, just mute yourself. That was a bit loud.
Hello? Can you I'm sorry, we're trying to figure out how we can do the audio that people can hear me here and that you can hear me there. But I think we should just go ahead and get started. And then we'll figure out the things here in a little bit. I would like to begin with thanking both Miguel and Patrick. Your talks were so like I got so much information from it, and I really love the way that Patrick put together. Sorry, you're gonna see me like crunch down a little bit, but I'll get it in a little bit. How you put two very important case studies forward, and how two different associations do things differently, and how we can go from there. And I think that's very important, of like what's being done now and how can we move forward. Miguel, I really love the way that that you looked at it from the perspective, and I love seeing it because I've seen it within CVNEC as well, of how we can start moving forward from there, and how we can start doing it. And I think one of the ideas that we kind of put together to start with I think, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
somebody else.
And so I'd like to get started. I don't know if anybody now has any questions or any to get started. If not, I can go ahead and start with some questions that I have on my own.
Yeah, why don't you ask a leading question or a question to start, and we can anybody can follow up from there.
Sorry, I had to go
Nadia.
get my notes.
Got it.
I have my notes in a different computer. Trying to manage. I get now why conferences are like either we're doing it online or we're doing it in person, because I'm trying to manage. We have poster sessions going on outside right now, and we have and then like inside, and we're trying to get so that the audio can be heard here and it could be heard there. But anyways, here are my notes. I think both of you from either within PSA or from Brazara as well, have tried to increase representation in many different ways. And I'd like to kind of join myself with Migs of like trying, how do we do that? And how are we, and maybe talk about how we've done it in the past a little bit. And how do we think, what we think we have done either right, or how we can do it better next time. I might move, sorry. And how we could do it better next time. And like, what do you think are our blind spots? And how do we start making it better from our perspective? Both of you either live in a lower middle income country or come from a low middle income country. And so I think your perspectives are very unique in that sense of like, how do we move forward from here? And I'll stop talking. Do you want to start, Migs, and then Patrick?
I was gonna put the ball to Patrick first, actually. Do you want to go first, Patrick?
Sure. So I guess one point that I think is important in all of these conversations is to first ground them in what it is that you want to diversify and what space are you even talking about. So one point related to this is because I have both worked in the PSA and now at the Busara Center, these are two very different organizations with different aims. The Psychological Science Accelerator, for those of you who don't know, it's they try to do these big crowdsourced studies that have many, many different collaborators. So one of our papers has like 400 different authors, just enormous. And a lot of these studies have the explicit aim of getting a sense of what's happening in many different countries and cultures. They're explicitly international, and the goal is often to test the generalizability of a particular finding or psychological process. So there, I think just if you're just focusing on executing the studies, what's most central to the PSA's aims is finding participants from many different regions. And second, it's also important, but it's maybe a little bit less central, is including people in leadership from many different countries. I would argue that that is more central, or it is pretty central, because the PSA wants also ideas on what to test from many different countries. But if you're just focusing on like getting the studies done, what you need most is the participants. Busara is a very different organization. It's a nonprofit. The way the aim of Busara is to alleviate poverty with a special focus on the Global South. And the way Busara sustains itself is by getting contracts from all these different funders. So while Busara really needs to have some grounding in the Global South in order to sustain itself, it's caught in this web of funding, and it sort of is forced to almost like follow the money. So, you know, figure out where the funders are and write a bunch of grants and proposals in order to keep itself going. So while the aim of Busara is to alleviate poverty and, you know, reflect the priorities of the people it's trying to serve, it's just it has a different set of focus areas. So, you know, if you're trying to figure out how diversity plays in these different arenas, it's just going to look very different. And I think that point actually generalizes somewhat to different regions of interest. So if you want to know, for example, how to increase representation in Africa, you have to be grounded in the academic structures and the funding landscape in Africa. Well, that's also true of Asia and Latin America. There are some commonalities, but you can't reach for a one-size-fits-all solution that will increase representation in all of these different areas. And also, I think you need to ground yourself in a specific organization or a specific landscape, whether it be academic, non-academic, the PSA or some other organization. Where I'd say there is a commonality, and this came up in my talk, is that across all these different regions, you have to ground yourself in where the money is coming from. This is, something that became clear to me because I was trying to find funding for the PSA, and also that's a big part of my role at the PSARA Center. And a lot of money comes from, funders in the global north. And a lot of it is specific to a specific focus area of the funders. And also, you can't just mandate that people increase representation like you can, but if there isn't resources to somehow enforce or ensure that mandate can be followed, you're just not going to get very many. You're not going to get anywhere. And then the final piece of it is you also have to pay attention to whether participating in the organization is even going to be worthwhile in the first place. So if you're telling people from the global south, oh, you should do psychology research or join the PSA or whatever, it's worth taking a step back and saying, well, given the state of the PSA or whatever the initiative is, am I even doing this person a favor by telling them to participate? Because it very well could not be the case, especially the PSA is a volunteer organization. It takes a lot of time to work on the PSA work. This is true of many different initiatives. It could be that in order to make this a good bet for whoever it is that you're trying to increase the representation of, that something else needs to happen to make it a worthwhile thing to participate in.
Great.
Thank you, Patrick. Do you want to add something, Migs?
Not that much actually, because I think your question was pretty much what I've covered in my talk as well, just like what we've tried to do in the PSA before really the main recruitment strategy before of the PSA was word of mouth, right? Through social networks, through Twitter primarily, and through our projects. Researchers interested in our projects tend then to be folded into the PSA network. Of course, we've also done particular talks introducing the PSA to many different contexts, many different disciplines, many different countries. I believe I was just doing a talk to Northern Macedonia the other month. So these kinds of volunteerism efforts to increase the reach of the network. With the CBNEC as well, the Community Building and Network Expansion Committee, we've tried this systematic way of cold calling researchers from top universities of each country that doesn't have a PSA presence. We started this out, with some hope. We knew that it was a difficult task, but it was a good start. We thought that whatever was going to happen, it was a good start. It was okay. We got single-digit percentages. So for every 200 emails we would send, we would get around 10 interests back, 10 people, 12 people, and maybe 8 of them would join the network. So, those aren't staggering numbers. But again, I think every voice from a developing nation in the PSA network is a good thing in itself. We are increasing representation in that sense. But I think, again, as what Patrick was saying, much of this is really related to the research capacity of each nation. It's so difficult to volunteer your time, your effort, your resources if you don't have that time and the resources to do volunteer. And so I think really, I was giving 4 ways forward in my talk, but I think really the most viable way that we can do this right now is just really to go straight into what matters, to form a special project that addresses shared national urgent issues, which would make the lack of resources, the lack of time worth it, right? If you were going to volunteer something, then something should be worthwhile in the first place. So really just it doesn't lower the barriers. My suggestions wouldn't lower the barriers. It wouldn't increase research capacity. It wouldn't necessarily put people directly on top of the leadership positions. but it will make all of these barriers worth it, hopefully. And so I think stronger regional collaborations, projects that take on culture-specific and culture-sensitive methods, and collaborations that really go into shared national urgent issues is a way to go forward, because it just hits so many birds in one stone. It hits network expansion already. If you make it worthwhile, if you make big team science work for the researchers doing it, then that's already one way. It benefits the researchers and the communities of where the researchers are from themselves, and it also very likely would also put in resources, especially if we partner with nonprofit organizations, and these would also align with their funding goals. For example, with International Poverty Action, for example, with Save the Children, with UNICEF, with UN, etc. There's so many potential funding sources for it. It will be a slog to actually coordinate, but I think we don't have resources now. What can we lose, right? So I think these are really promising ways forward, and I'm really glad to have people in this room, because I've always believed that, just if you put passionate, caring, smart people in one room and get them a problem to solve and potential ways forward, then I think we can really make headways with this issue.
I think that's a really important issue that you bring up, and I think I'm not sure. I would love to hear everybody's opinion on it. But at least in Mexico, a lot of the funding is starting to go to like national problems. The paper that I owe you, I'm gonna put a little plug in. Miguel is working on an APS Observer collection of papers, and one of the things that I've been working on with him and other people from Latin America is like this whole like applied basic science dichotomy, and how it's not really a dichotomy. I got the opportunity to read a lot of papers of like, oh my God, this is artificial, and it's another way of like putting in colonialism into this and making our science less of a science. But we can talk all about that in another place. But I think one of the things that a lot of at least Mexico and some other Latin American countries are doing is saying, okay, if we're going to use money, and it's going to be like government money, which the funding for like a lot of the Latin American countries, it's like very, very depressing. It has like been halved in the past 5 to 10 years. Like it used to be, like in Mexico, it used to be 0.6% of the GDP, and now it's 0.3% of the GDP. And so even that very small amount of money is all going to applied research. And so if we put together our heads on something that we can all, that a lot of our countries are going through, like poverty or violence, corruption, or coronavirus, mental health, like social health, like lots of things that we could be doing, changing just the topics would, as Mig said, be lots of birds with one stone, but including increasing funding, increasing interest, increasing researchers. So I think that would be a good thing. I think one of the things that also Mig's, and I would like to get like both Patrick and Mig's opinion on this, and I don't know, I know we just started in PSA trying to do hubs, but I think one of the other barriers that we've seen with this is, and Natalia mentioned it in the last panel, was like language barriers, cultural barriers, and stuff like that. So how do we deal with those, and maybe having something like regional hubs might help. And how does that align with the whole idea of like open and big team science still? Like if we're in a really big team and now we're trying to get smaller teams, like how do we make that all fit. I don't know if you have any ideas. Either one of you have any ideas about that?
Sure, maybe I'll go first. The thing with cultural, linguistic, regional differences is that there is no shortcut. There's always going to be growing pains, especially if at first you don't speak like a common set of terms across, for example, disciplinary boundaries. So I think I've touched upon this on my talk as well, that, platforms like the PSA, where you are guaranteed a platform to just constantly interact with each other. It might not be specifically for a particular project at first. It can be some other thing. It can be some other shared goal. It can just be like a sort of social space. But the important thing is that you need to be able to interact with each other on a constant regular basis. I think platforms like those are really important towards building towards smoothing out those linguistic, cultural, etc. differences. So I think this is also a good plug for the regional hubs that we are launching at the PSA. For example, PSA Latin America, PSA Southeast Asia, PSA South Asia, just because when you're with a group again, and you constantly interact with each other, you know where they're coming from, you gain social capital, and that's when things start. That's when you start brainstorming, that's when you're able to collaborate. I think even this ABRIR was a product of again, these constant interactions from a shared space. This was, I believe many of people were interacting either in the committee in the PSA before or during the PSA conference. So in a way, I would advocate really for those kinds of spaces, but it's tricky because they tend to fizzle out if you just, if you organize them on Twitter or if you organize them in some space, it's very hit or miss. It can fizzle out in the next week if the lead organizer gets tired. It can fizzle out in the next month if there's no common goal. So I think embedding it in a long-standing network like the PSA is important, just because it also helps in that barrier of, oh, who's going to organize this now? Which platform are we going to go in now, etc. So I think like embedding those shared social spaces where you can constantly interact in a long-standing network are important conditions for the things that we want to do here. So if you haven't joined the PSA, come join us. If you want to join the regional hubs, please do, because many of our advocacies here, many of the things that we want to do, I think should start in those kinds of spaces that we're building. Patrick, what about you?
So I think you summarized a lot of the important points really well, Migs, and I agree completely about the importance of having sustainable space. I do feel like in my current position, a lot of what I do is play the role of sort of a broker, in that I have connections to, very specific area of psychology and open science, and I got to know that landscape. And my colleagues, on the other hand, know much more about, what's happening in development economics, or especially in Kenya, or we also have an India office. So I sort of like bring together different people and hope that something cool comes from it. And that's a lot of what I do. And the reason that's possible is because Pusara is providing this shared infrastructure or this platform, as Nix was emphasizing. So I think finding those platforms and ensuring that they can be sustainable plays a really important role in creating this shared network that can get things done. I will say that the sustainability of the platform is really important, but once you have them, I think they can play this like brokerage role where they facilitate connections and unexpected things happen, and those don't have to follow a particular plan. They can sort of happen organically, and a lot of good can come from that.
Yeah, I think you Patrick, you bring up really, really good points. And I think one of the things that I talked to, I've never heard of this topic before. And I was talking to Dana the other day, and we were talking about these bridge people, people that have like experience in both research in high income countries and also in low middle income countries. And I feel like a lot of us, like including both you, Patrick, and you, Miguel, that have had experience in both places, and we are like, sadly, sometimes we do, as Miguel was saying, sometimes we do get tired, but we are doing these bridges of like, okay, this is what I learned here, this is what I learned there, and then kind of holding it together to try to see how we can try to include everything and make sure that we're getting the expertise from like in my case, Mexico, and then getting the expertise from the US or the UK or anywhere else where I have my other collaborators. And I know you probably think so, but I think so. It's like, it's very hard to try to do that. And I think another thing that you bring up that's a really good point is a lot of the times we think of science in a kind of in a, maybe it's not the best word, but in a colonial way of like, you know, somebody comes from the US and I'm going to come and teach you how science is done. And we don't really give the value to the people in the countries that we're in doing our research. So I think it's very important what you bring up, Patrick, of, you know, bridging and coming and giving your expertise and bringing people that help, but also giving the strength to the people that are in the country that you're in. So I think that's one way also of increasing representation and increasing diversity, giving people the value that they're worth, either as, you know, providing expertise from the culture, bridging, or you know, methods expertise. So I think that's you both bring up really, really important points. We have another 3 to 5 minutes. I don't know if there's anything else you would like to add, or if anybody else in the public, either here or here, would like to add anything. Alma raised her hand.
Oh yeah, I'll try to be brief actually, not to keep you too long. So I just wanted to somehow follow up on what Nadia was saying about like researchers coming from the West and thinking that they can teach us everything. I got the impression that sometimes in these big science projects, when we have like, I don't know, researchers from the West and researchers from the global South, there is that like, I don't know how to call it, like whether that would be a prejudice or like some sort of a stereotype that those from the global South don't really know a lot, and that somehow, you know, they shouldn't be engaged too much. So somehow you get the impression that in big teams, those other people group together and the other ones are not that much involved, or they are not even given the opportunity. So I think that just like I didn't have that impression with PSA, to be honest, luckily, but I had that impression elsewhere. So I was just like thinking of whether that can be, but whether we can overcome it, and whether us as psychological scientists actually should know that it is not also about how much someone knows, but it is also about how much someone can learn. So it's also a learning process, and how to like somehow teach, if we can say, those from the West that basically, you know, they should engage us and give us the opportunity, and then maybe even if we don't know something at the moment, we can actually learn that, or maybe we even know but we are never asked to do it, and so on.
Yeah, so I can follow up on that point if it's all right. Just to be blunt about my situation, I'm not an expert at all in what the political situation in Kenya, or really anything about what's on the ground in Kenya. I am an expert in a certain type of psychology methods, and that's really the expertise that I bring to my position. I really need to rely on my colleagues a lot to get any of my work done. And I think to connect this point to a point that we were discussing earlier in the panel, the landscape of research in Kenya is really so different from the landscape of research that I was used to before I occupied my position. Because most of what happens in Kenya
I think, yeah, I think this is one of the issues that I was
landscape,
mostly,
even
yeah.
if the emphasis is on solving concrete problems. But you know, the place, the landscape of what I'm coming into, both on the funder side and on you know, the side of the policymakers and the side of the, you know, everyday people who we work with in our studies, is really on, like, you know, how are we solving a concrete problem right now? And so that takes to anybody who wants to like do something useful in Kenya with the work that they're doing, like that takes a different orientation. There's not this emphasis on, you know, abstract, say we're, you know, solving the big questions and about human nature. No, that's just not it at all. And in fact, psychology itself just does not really exist as we would think of it in Europe or the United States. Instead, it's development economics, and that has more of an emphasis on solving concrete problems.
All right, and my take on it regarding the prejudice issue, I've been lucky that in the PSA we're very, very democratic, and that has not been an issue at all. So for people who are just beginning into big team science, one, it doesn't need to be that way. There doesn't need to be prejudice. One, you can choose, you can definitely go into networks where that isn't an issue. For example, like the PSA. And two, I think you were talking about, oh, how can we educate them? How can we make them see, you know, like see us as an equal, etc. For me, I don't know if I'm speaking more as a researcher here, or it's just my personal bias. It's like, if that is an issue, then, you know, like, fuck them. Like, why go to that stage where, you know, you need to educate? It's either, you know, lead the way, do what you can within your regional collaboration that doesn't involve prejudicial peoples, because there are, as Patrick was saying, there are experts in our context that we know what to do, and so on. And big team science is really just a way to be able to you know, extend those to increase our impact. So if it doesn't work, if it comes with prejudice, nobody, you know, it's not a birthright to have a big team science. What we really should focus on is how do we make sure that the local problems that we're all facing somehow gets to be shared, the learnings that we get somehow gets to be shared among others. Are we gonna extend the session?
We can. There's one question. If you can't stay, we would love it. If you can't, that's fine. There was a question that I think that followed up what you were saying, and if you want to look at it, and if you need to get going, that's fine. But I think Alexandra has a really good question, kind of follow up to what you were saying, is like regarding the PSA hubs, should we strive to set up more PSA-like, but not necessarily PSA affiliated? Could be or could not. Networks in more countries of the global south, or should we strive to diversify the existing networks, more smaller hubs, or one big hub, or is having just PSA enough?
My bias here definitely is to join existing networks like the PSA and have the hubs there under the umbrella organization, just because it takes such a lot of resources, it takes such a lot of effort, it takes such a lot of organizing to be able to do the smaller networks starting from scratch for each of the places. It doesn't need to be that way. There are existing networks that you would have the autonomy, that you would have the decision-making powers, etc., that you can embed yourself in the existing resources as well. I think it's really a matter of pragmatism and sustainability. If we were in an ideal world where people can just like set up their own network like that, that would be great. But you know, given the constraints, given all of the things that we know about like sustainability, I really would encourage to join existing very democratic networks like the PSA.
I think one of the things also that's coming up a lot is I think there are, well, PSA, and there's the many babies, many many goats, many labs, many's of the many's. But there's also ABRIR, and I think what we can start doing is just like, as Mig says, join the ones that are there so that we can do those resources. We hope that ABRIR can become a place where we can start working as well in working into projects, and not separated, but affiliated to maybe the many-many's or the PSA. Certainly PSA has been supporting us. We're going to have a hackathon on Saturday on how to get a project started, and maybe we can get that funded through the Templeton Foundation. There's still some funds, and so that's the whole kind of the whole point of that hackathon. And we're also going to have a hackathon with Fort, where we're going to try to collaborate with them as well to try to get something started with there. So we do have, I think what Migs is saying is very important, that and kind of what Brian said before. Chris, I'm going to go with you next. Let me just finish this idea of management is super important in big team science and in open science. So if we have a structure together already, try to go with it, and also to kind of go back to what Alma was saying, and if that's not working, maybe try to do something, and what Migs was saying too, like try to go somewhere else. Chris, did you have a question or a comment?
Hello, yes. First time, Chris, and I'm currently working with Migs actually in the CBNAC committee. And I've had the pleasure to talk to Patrick on Slack, but we haven't officially talked in person. What I'm about to say is not a question per se, it's an idea that ends up with the what do you think? So that would be my question in the end. So I think I've brought up this idea during a CBNAC meeting, and it's about because the theme of this session is increasing representation, etc. It tackled more the structural aspect of the PSA rather than the individual aspect, meaning, for instance, right now, most of the strategies have been to contact people, to contact organizations and see if they would be interested. But one of the things that always crossed me is the topics that are being studied in general. Like if I were to visit the public website of the PSA and I check the studies, they're really interesting, obviously, but if I'm thinking from the perspective of a non-weird country, I might think that, yeah, these aren't that important to me right now. So I don't know if I want to join. And obviously this has been tackled a lot. We talk about indigenous psychology and decolonizing psychology and doing ethnographic studies, starting from scratch in other countries, etc. And I think that's a good way to start. But at the same time, it's probable that if we present to PSA as a network that allows that to happen, let's say if we broaden the topics a bit more, so instead of saying this is the project that we're adopting and hopefully we can do this project internationally, we're taking a theme. Let's say, for instance, we're taking collective action and policy change. So I'm going to talk in terms of categories a bit. Every culture, let's say whatever that means, can adapt that theme to their context and do separate research. And this is where the regional hubs would come in handy, because I don't think necessarily doing exactly the same research globally should be the goal in the end. Because if we think about it, even if, let's say, we take the, what was it, the balance model, what was it exactly, a perception balance model, the face, yeah. So yeah, you can definitely start some things from scratch and do qualitative research to find out how this applies in some cultural settings, but they might not want to do that in the first place. So it's not the starting point for them. So that's why I think broadening the umbrella a bit such that we accept projects based on themes that would interest everyone globally. And then each culture could potentially maybe have different research questions within that theme, could encourage researchers from non-weird countries to join the PSA and see the use. I think we have to find a way to convey this when we contact people from underrepresented areas, so they can see the appeal of joining it rather than think, okay, but the structure, the history of colonization, etc., all of that will come into account. I don't think joining it right now would be a good idea for me. So this is where the what do you think comes after writing a pilot episode.
So one reaction I have, I'm going to go back to what I was saying before about how the structure of the research or whatever you're calling it is really different depending on region. Maybe I can convey this best by describing one big team science project that I'm trying to get started in Busara. So this is testing whether this protocol to contextualize behavioral science measures to a specific cultural setting, whether it works in a variety of regions. So we have this protocol we've developed in Busara to edit measures for cultural references that maybe don't apply in one specific region. And we want to do this project where we do this in a bunch of different sites. The way I've tried to recruit collaborators is, Busara has worked with a lot of different people from a lot of different regions. We sort of tap that network, and I send one-off emails and try to, describe the project and get it done. And with Busara's collaborators, one of the first questions they ask is, well, where the resources going to come from? It's maybe not said exactly that way, but that's one of the first questions, because a lot of our collaborators are either nonprofits like us, or they're in a university that maybe doesn't have dedicated funding available for research. So any money to support that time would come out of personal funds. So it really makes sense that would be one of the first questions asked. That's just not something that comes up with PSA projects. You just send out this open call. A lot of the people who join the PSA have dedicated funding because they, their professor, maybe half their time is spent teaching, but that effectively subsidizes the research time. So it makes sense that they can choose, they have the privilege of choosing whatever it is that they want to spend their time on, and they don't have to do this process of figuring out where's the money coming from, how am I going to keep doing what it is that I want to do. So that's meant that in order to do this project, in order to even get it off the ground, I first have to do a lot of grant writing, meaning I've spent most of this past year doing grant writing on my team to do the projects that I want to do. I have this slate of projects all lined up, and I'd love to do them, but I need to constantly think about where is the money coming from. So it's from that context that I say, I just don't even think that this is really a major constraint, at least based on the research that I'm doing and the people I work with most of the time. The major constraint is, where's the money coming from? And then second, because a lot of the funding sources have strings attached. So, it's it's USAID or it's some UN organization. They want to solve a specific problem. And they might even have some idea of how the problem is solved. So there, you get into the issue of they're defining the priority, and we as Busara or my colleagues or whoever, we're sort of trying to fit how we want to do within this, this variable square peg. So that's a different issue, but I hope I'm conveying, from my perspective, the people I work with and me for that matter, the major constraint is we need to constantly justify our time. We need to pay for our time. And this whole structure where that assumes that you have plenty of time to devote to, and you can freely choose whatever it is that you're doing, it's just not our reality.
All right, and my take on it, it's a little bit complicated. First, I'll say things that I like about the idea. One is that I'm always an advocate for culture-specific and culture-sensitive methods. We definitely should have more of those. I think what you're also, touching on is a sort of many operationalization, which is kind of like what Patrick's project, PSA 005, is actually doing, which is a lot of operationalization of stereotype threat. We can definitely do that across more countries as well. So that's good. And also the more, more boundary pushing big team science, like field experiments, like ethnography, like qualitative studies across a global scale. Also like that element in your pitch. But I think the overall idea of just like, oh, let's have a category and let them sort of have their own research question about it. I don't think we need the PSA for that, right? Like that's already the university system. We have specific topics, collective action that's being studied in the Philippines, that's being studied in Kenya, that's being studied in the US without sort of centralized action. And so I think that's already in a bit the status quo. So the idea as is, I'm not sure what the value add is with a PSA. Why do it in that network? But like the things that we're doing in the PSA, really the way that we structure our studies is that it hopefully, like the sum of its parts, like the whole is greater than any individual data collection. So in a way, I think there are promising ways in your pitch. There are promising elements. As a whole, I'm not sure it's the most viable way to go about special projects for the PSA. And again, many of those ideas we can also, again, incorporate into, for example, many poverty or many inequality, which really have a sort of focus that many sites would be able to give us like information on. So yes, always happy to talk to you more about this as well, Chris, especially with the internship scheme. Chris is our wonderful, wonderful committee member and intern in the PSA.
Chris, I think you bring up, thank you, Megs and Patrick. I think you bring up a really, really good point too about, we're thinking about diversity in I think the first thing when we think about diversity or increasing representation is we think of like people, like we want to see different types of people. And I think we've brought it up in this whole talk that it's not just about the people, but it's also about the topics, which you bring up that is really, really, really good. But it's also about representing on the type of applications that we're going to have it. But also, and I didn't think about it because I think most of my research is quantitative, is increasing representation on the types of methodologies we use. And I think a lot of what happens in psychology and maybe in other sciences, it's all about like the quantitative research and saying, oh, qualitative research isn't rigorous enough, or we don't have, et cetera, or whatever, which are the same excuses that we have for not including research or not publishing research in low and middle income countries of like, oh, it's not rigorous enough. So I think you bring up a really, really good point. Thanks, Chris, of like increasing representations on types of methodologies and on the topics, on the way that we decide which topics we are going to study and talk about and do these kinds of things. Aisha's saying is that this is such a big area to unearth the politics of quant versus qual, and I think it is. I'm gonna like right now say that I've been trained as a quant researcher, and I have a lot of my students right here from social sciences, and a lot of them are from qualitative, and thanks to them, I've learned a lot of things, and like the importance of qualitative research and the importance of that kind of research in social and important social issues that affect the world. So thank you, Chris. That was a great participation. I think we have like 2 to 3 more minutes maybe, and if nobody has any full disclosure, I haven't eaten breakfast.
I'll just add very quickly at this point. We're talking about going beyond the initial PSA projects. You're talking about boundary pushing, big team science, etc. But I just want to make a really big note, of course, that the reason why we had those projects, for example, the PSA 001, PSA 002, which we might think is not, culture sensitive enough, it doesn't work for this kind of context, etc. But the thing is, it was already very difficult to implement those kinds of projects. Like any big team science project is already difficult to implement by itself, even in a relatively simple design. So it's also, when we're talking about these different methodologies, talking about many qualitative designs, many, etc., many field experiment, these are very, very, very ambitious initiatives that we're planning. And it's these proof of concept, like the proof of when I'm thinking about PSA 001, 002, 003, like I'm thinking of them as proof of concept that we were able to do a difficult thing. And we want to do more difficult things, but it also shouldn't blind us to the fact that, again, these are difficult projects to implement. Part of the reason why our dreams of more methodology plurality in big team science isn't happening, again, is also just really with the reality that this will take a lot. These are resource intensive. This will take a lot of planning, a lot of resources, a lot of effort. And so many of the things that we want to plan in the future should also take into account that, that's a reality. We're going to go for ambitious, but it's difficult things. Patrick, go ahead.
I really just want to underscore that point. I think you're right on, Migs. And I think this is also why I'm a fan of thinking really hard about what the constraints actually are. It's very easy to get into a mindset that you want to solve these big problems and you want to throw everything in, and the vision can get bigger and bigger and bigger. But especially when you're working with limited resources, which I think is maybe the central issue for low and middle income countries. It's really important, I think, to think very hard about what constraints are and how you can tackle those constraints, and leave aside some of the things for later that are still important, but maybe aren't directly relevant to those constraints.
All right. I really want to thank both Patrick and Miguel for being here. I think your experiences are invaluable to try to get this whole conversation started on how we can do it. It's hard, as we've seen it. We've all experienced it. But I think from the things that we have done so far, I think we can. And I think we need to keep on pushing it as much as possible. I'd like to thank you not only for being here, but also for pushing the boundaries and trying to do the best that we can to try to increase representation in big team science. And hopefully we can keep on pushing within Versara, within PSA, within ABRIR to kind of make this better and even answer the hard questions and take on the big projects that might be really difficult to do. So thank you again.
One last, can I? All right. And just before, because I love these spaces, because you just like, even though I don't know, for example, half of these people, if you're in the space, I love you already, because it tends to attract, passionate, amazing individuals. And one thing that I really, and thank you so much, Nadia and your ABRIR team for inviting me here. One thing that I really, in these kinds of spaces, I'm always reminded of the saying of my old mentor. And he always said, we create the things that we wish existed. And these are the spaces to create the things that we wish existed. So if we can, manifest something out, like in my mind, there's already a many poverty project for 2025 or a many poverty project for 2026. We have this vision, like we dream about this. So if it's gonna be there, if we create those things, like how will you bring it out to the world? And so I wish we won't be strangers. Please either message us in Slack, let's talk over email, etc. And let's bring this out into the world, these things that we wish we existed or we wish existed. And that's me. All right.
All right, thank you all. Please come in 5 minutes to our next panel. Again, thank you again. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Patrick. This was, your videos were invaluable, and your Q&A, and for staying late. We really appreciate it, and have a wonderful morning, night. I think it's really late for you, Patrick. We really appreciate you taking the time, even though it's super, super late. So thank you, and have a very wonderful evening, day, afternoon. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.